Elon Musk's influence amongst Republican voters has taken a major hit because according to a new poll that was just released, his numbers are going down with Republican voters. Right after the November 2024 election, The Economist YouGov did a poll that showed that nearly half of Republicans, 47%, wanted Musk to have a lot of influence in Trump's future administration. Another 29% wanted him to have a little, while 12% didn't want him involved at all. Fast forward to today, those numbers have shifted dramatically. Now only 26% of Republicans still want Musk to have a lot of influence, which is a steep drop. Meanwhile, 43% said they'd prefer him to just have a little, and 17% don't want him to be involved at all. That was according to a poll that just came out yesterday. Of course, Democrats, none of them, the numbers for them are very dismal. It's like 6% that want him involved at all. All the rest of them don't want him involved, in any capacity whatsoever. This is very different than what we're seeing on social media, right? And what we're seeing in the news. We're seeing that, Musk and Doge are doing all of these really amazing things, and they're going in and they're ridding the government of a bunch of waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think in a lot of cases they are, but people are becoming pretty skeptical with some other things that perhaps Musk is getting into. There's the conflict of interest issues that people are a little bit concerned about. But there's other things, if you're not concerned, maybe you should be, because, we all know that Musk has been talking about free speech, and he definitely with X has made free speech more of a thing, and a lot more people are on the platform than before. But behind the scenes, he's been helping build the most powerful surveillance state in human history. Derrick Broze has been exposing all of this. In his latest reporting, he reveals how Musk's SpaceX is directly working with U.S. intelligence agencies to create Starshield, a massive spy satellite network run by the National Reconnaissance Office, also known as NRO. And the head of the NRO, Christopher Scalise, openly admitted the purpose of this system, saying, "Now you can't hide because you're constantly being looked at." Okay, so Musk, the guy who was supposed to be fighting for your rights, is actually helping the government make sure you can never hide from them again. And it doesn't stop there. Broze also uncovered the Stargate project, a collaboration between Trump's team and Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, and other big tech oligarchs, many of them tied to Bilderberg and global surveillance initiatives. These aren't just Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. They're the ones engineering the future of AI-driven social control. So here's the real question. Has Trump's movement been hijacked? Have the same technocrats who pushed censorship, vaccine mandates, and surveillance now embedded themselves inside the MAGA movement? Derrick Broze is here to break it all down. Derrick, thank you so much for being here. So Elon Musk was once seen as a free speech hero, but your reporting suggests he's actually helping build a massive surveillance network with the government. What do you people need to understand about Starshield and Musk's real role in all of this?
Yeah, thank you, Kim, for having me on and for asking these important questions. So as far as the Starshield program goes, I think the main takeaway, or one of the big takeaways, is that while everybody out there who are Elon Musk fans, and particularly of SpaceX and of the Falcon rockets and things that he's creating, in as far as the we're going to Mars issue, those rockets are actually about sending out satellites. Those rockets have been sending out spy satellites for the NRO, as you mentioned, for at least a decade. And I think going back to shortly after 9/11, Elon actually has a pretty extensive history. SpaceX has a pretty extensive history of working with the U.S. government, not just the NRO, but most recently it's the NRO. And we only know about this because there was a little bit of mainstream reporting, or maybe, it wasn't supposed to come out, but it was reported by Reuters and Forbes about a year ago that there was a $1.8 billion classified contract between SpaceX and the US government. And that's all that was known about it. There wasn't any other details. And since that time, we've been able to get a bit more information about it, and it is related to the Starshield program. So every time Elon is hyping up the latest SpaceX rocket testing or shooting one up into the lower Earth atmosphere, in addition to that, in addition to testing out rockets to allegedly go to Mars, they're actually also sending out these payloads, these classified satellites for the NRO and for other U.S. government agencies and military agencies. I think that is probably the main thing that people need to understand. And really, I don't think it is or should be too big of a surprise if you really understand Elon Musk, his history and his companies, and that they have always worked with the government. He is a military industrial complex contractor. I think that's something that people need to also take away. And in fact, we're seeing in this sort of this new kind of alt tech, as some call it in the mainstream, alt tech populist movement within the MAGA movement, which does involve people like Peter Thiel and others. We're seeing them position themselves as an alternative to the old military industrial complex, Raytheon, Northrop
Yeah.
Grumman, and others. So there's now these partnerships forming in that regard as well. But I think that's the main takeaway. I mean, we could get deeper into what you were alluding to about the head of the NRO saying you can't hide anymore. But that's what it really comes down to, is that Elon Musk and his companies are military industrial complex contractors. They receive subsidies. His wealth is largely dependent on the military. And so while we, people out there clap and applaud and say, yay, another rocket, we're going to space, it's actually helping build this massive satellite spy network around the world.
So Starshield specifically is, so this, because people are familiar with Starlink, right? The Wi-Fi, the internet grid that Elon has built up there. But this is something different. These are satellites meant for spying.
Yeah. So I think that's also an important point as well, that in my view, or one way to kind of look at this is that the Starlink is kind of the public face of this. So you promote this idea that we can put satellites all over the world, small satellites that will help people in low internet access areas and areas of poverty, et cetera, or during emergencies, as we've seen during some hurricanes, where Elon Musk has brought out the Starlink equipment to help people. And that is all true. Like, sure, just like any tool, it has multi-purposes. And one of those uses could be helping people who don't have internet access. So there's that side of it. But I tend to view that as just the sort of public way of, getting that out there, because Starlink and Starshield are kind of the same thing. They're both basically, one is the public side and one is the military side. So these aren't necessarily even separate satellites from Starlink that the public uses. It's just that they are also under the Starshield program, giving the military and the intelligence networks access to these same satellite network that they're selling to the public as just, here's a way to have good internet no matter where you're at in the world. So they're definitely linked together in that regard.
Interesting. It's also like OpenAI. I mean, you bring up Sam Altman and OpenAI, ChatGPT. Didn't they just launch a government arm of this just like last week, where the government is able to use a special classified version of ChatGPT or something along those lines? Do you know about that?
Yeah, and I haven't dove too deeply in that, but I did see the announcement, and I think that that is just another good example of that blurring. And this has been going on, of course, before Trump, but maybe some of the faces in the particular companies are shifting. Like in your introduction, you asked, are the same big tech companies who've been censoring us for years, are they now in the Trump administration? I would say some yes and some no. It's not exactly, at least on the face from what we're seeing publicly, the same exact people, right? If anything, maybe we could say this is big tech, and you have the left-leaning Democrat supporting progressive big tech guys, and some of those were involved in the COVID censorship. That would be the Zuckerbergs and others who are now sort of remaking themselves and prostrating themselves before Trump and trying to get in his good graces. And then you have the other side, and I use the term side kind of, I don't even know if that is accurate, but just for the sake of conversation, some that look more progressive and some that lean more conservative. Peter Thiel likes to call himself a libertarian. Nothing that he does is anything to do with libertarian principles or values or the philosophy of it. But you have the Peter Thiels and the PayPal mafia, David Sachs, who has also been made Trump's AI crypto czar, Howard Lutnick, who's the commerce secretary, who's connected to Rumble, as well as Peter Thiel, and he from Cantor Fitzgerald, his company's been going big in crypto. A lot of that faction are absolutely within and infiltrating the Trump administration. And I think the other important distinction is that, and this is something I was kind of trying to raise the alarm about before the election, is that Peter Thiel, of course, is a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. And for those who are concerned about organizations like the World Economic Forum, if you're not aware of the Bilderberg Group, I believe they probably, if there is such a hierarchy, are a bit higher up on the pyramid and at the very least more private than this public-facing organization, the World Economic Forum, which has taken a lot of heat the last few years. But Peter Thiel, who supported Donald Trump in 2016 and who helped Donald Trump's vice president win his senator race in Ohio, is also connected to numerous other people in the Trump administration. And he is a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. We could also mention Jim O'Neill, which Whitney Webb just wrote a new article about his connections to Peter Thiel. And so those folks are all up in the Trump administration. But make no mistake, on the other side, during the Harris-Biden campaign, you had people like Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, who's also a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, who was supporting that faction. So I don't necessarily think like this was going to end up differently. Maybe the names, maybe the companies slightly would be different, but ultimately it seems like technocracy is the end goal because you have this large, I would say at the very least, the Bilderberg is a representation of the ruling class, whoever you want to point the finger at when it comes to that. And both Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt, as well as Alex Karp, who is supporting Harris and who is a co-founder of Palantir with Peter Thiel. I mean, the web is pretty deep, but if you just start looking for connections within Trump's administration to Peter Thiel, to Oracle, Larry Ellison, Sam Altman was also an attendee of the Bilderberg Group last year. They're launching the WorldCoin project. I mean, there's so much aspects of, I think, technocracy that perhaps people are ignoring because there's talk of the JFK files being released, because Ross Ulbricht was freed, because there's some good stuff, like you mentioned, US aid and waste there. Sure, real waste might be cut, and that's a positive thing. But I think ultimately the technocratic philosophy and ideology is that politics is not good enough to manage society. Voters are too dumb. We're not intelligent enough to know how to organize ourselves, and that businessmen aren't smart enough either. So that's where this whole technocratic idea comes in. You get rid of the sort of capitalist class, get rid of the political class, get rid of the idea of democracy, and instead you have the machines, is what they originally called it in the 1930s, or AI, helping manage things with a technocratic king at the top. And what they called for in the 1930s, they called for the North American Technate. It's worth noting that it included Canada, Mexico, the Panama Canal, and Greenland. So I think we're very much headed in that direction.
Do you think somebody's whispering in Trump's ear all of these ideas? I mean, or do you think he's just naturally coming up with them and it just so happens that these are the things that were talked about previously?
I definitely think somebody is whispering in Trump's ear. I mean, I'm of the belief that that nobody makes it into the White House without, having been allowed there to some degree. That doesn't mean that every single vote is fake, or that nothing we see is real in the screens, or that there aren't real conflicts within political factions. I don't mean to say that and oversimplify things, but I don't think Donald Trump would have been put in this position if he hadn't already been shown to be loyal to the Zionists, to the technocrats, to the billionaire class. And, we could look at his funding. I already mentioned the Peter Thiel and that whole technocratic class there, but you can look at the Zionist class behind him as well. Miriam Adelson is a name that many people know, but there are others. And I just don't think that anybody who's allowed into that position or to rise to that level is going to be placed in there if they are truly a threat to the system. That doesn't mean that we might not receive some scraps from the table and, some, my kind of working theory has been that Trump would come in fast and there would be some wins and some things that people could celebrate. I would say easy wins, things that don't really cost him much political capital, but in the long term, the bigger picture of technocracy would advance. I mean, I think we're seeing that in the first couple of weeks. Like, okay, there was a alleged TikTok was down for 14 hours and then Trump saved it, and then ceasefire, maybe. And then Ross was freed. Okay, that's a positive thing. Okay, JFK, RFK, these sorts of things. But then Stargate and talking about mRNA AI vaccines and the infiltration of his cabinet with Peter Thiel acolytes and the PayPal mafia and the Zionists. Like, I think that is really where my focus is. And that's what I'm just trying to get more and more people to pay attention to. And if that means I'm black-pilled, then I guess so be it.
Well, I mean, I think that, and what I've always said is that, they spend millions. And I mean, the think tanks, those that have power or want power, they spend literally millions upon millions of dollars to try to figure out how to get people who believe one certain thing towards their end goal, and to get people that then champion their end goal. I mean, look at the MAGA movement, what's gone on right now, and it's just shocking to see. MAGA has always been make America great again. It's been an internal focused movement. We need to focus on America, focus on the American people. And now you've got Trump saying things like, we're going to take Greenland. We're going to make Canada a 51st state. Now we're going to take over Gaza and rebuild it and make it the, Riviera of the Middle East. What about the Riviera of America? What about building America? And you've got MAGA people actually championing this, thinking, oh, yes, it's a great idea to drop millions, billions and billions of dollars into Gaza, or billions building Gaza, or billions of dollars into purchasing Greenland and taking on those people who, by the way, live off of quite a hefty social safety net system from Denmark. They're not going to give up their free healthcare, their free education, their free elderly care, their free child. None of. I mean, they're getting all of the Scandinavian thing. The social safety net that Scandinavia has. It's not even a safety net. It's just a social system that Scandinavia has for all of its people. It's just basics that Scandinavia provides. They have all of that. We would have to provide all of that, and nobody's even batting an eyelash over that. Like, hello, I mean, this has
Yeah.
what's going on with America. So then we're being tossed crumbs, and that is what. And maybe they're big crumbs, maybe they're tasty crumbs, right? They're really good, and people are like, finally, we're getting the crumb I wanted. When he bans transgender in women's sports, he signs that, and that's a win that was so easy. That everybody cheers it on and says, yeah, of course, like, men should not be competing against women in sports. The vast majority of people on both sides of the aisle agree with that. So he does these things, and that, like you said, has very little, it doesn't take, no one's against that. The Zionists aren't against that. The technocrats aren't against that. Like, it doesn't threaten the financial class, the technocrats, the Zionists. Like, those classes are, they're like, yeah, feed the people crumbs, let them eat cake. I mean, that's what's happening. And then behind the scenes, so they figured out ways to gaslight people into going along with their agenda. And I think
I
that's
agree.
what.
I just add to
Go
that real
ahead.
quick, Kim, that when it comes, just as the example you used about the transgender issue, again, he did executive orders, a bunch of them came through. And like you said, that's common sense to most people. And polls have shown that for years. It's only been the really extreme leftists and those who kind of are pushing their gender ideology that we're embracing that. That doesn't mean that everybody is a
Right.
bigot or anything like that. But generally people are like, yes, there's two genders, science, biology, et cetera.
Right.
So that issue, though, is hyped up in the media for years and stoked by left and right for years, to the point, where people are fighting in the streets about it, and it became a national issue. And then it allows Trump, and I'm not saying that whole thing was planned, but I do think, generally speaking, as you were mentioning there a moment ago, that when they want us to fight for these crumbs, and as if we've just won some big victory, and I think that could be by design. It could just be a consequence of these certain wedge issues, which, yes, there are trans people and these things do affect their lives, not to deny any of that. But for the majority of the people, the vast majority of the country, these issues, they seem common sense. And whenever somebody's pushing one extreme left or extreme right, it just seems crazy. But over time, it's built up into such a wedge divisive issue that it's easy for somebody to come along and just do a quick, easy fix. And hey, you did a victory. And it makes Trump look really good when the other side has been going completely insane for the last however many years.
Right. And then it allows them to do the things you're talking about, where they kind of swap out. And I think this is something people should understand has been in the works since the Obama administration, the swapping out of the military industrial complex from traditional warfare. And this was the brainchild of people like Antony Blinken, actually, and Michelle Flournoy in their West Exec Advisors when they were working under Obama, and then they left and they created their West Exec Advisors. They started pushing the government, both sides, towards technology warfare rather than traditional warfare. And they started to then have contracts, their little advisory firm, shouldn't call it small, but their advisory firm started getting clients like Google, started getting the tech guys, probably Elon, all these different tech companies, bringing them into the new military industrial complex. And they've been working on this for over 10 years now with these guys, saying, you're the future of warfare, you're the future, and we're going to be dumping a lot of money into you, giving you classified access to certain things, contracts, government contracts. And now we're seeing it's been 10 years. So of course they've been able to accelerate. And yes, even though traditional military warfare is obviously still very much a thing, the traditional military industrial complex, I'm sure, made sure of that. But there's the new rise of this surveillance state, which isn't just for surveillance purposes. They use it for national security. We have to do this all under the guise of keeping you safe. We have to spy on all of you, don't you know? Because we have to keep you safe, right? We have to label all of you terrorists, don't you know? Because we have to keep you safe.
And it
So that's
also
what they've
creates more
done.
problems for transparency, Kim. The issues of transparency are not going to get any easier, any better whenever we're dealing with allegedly private companies. And I say that, in quotations, because many of these big tech companies, which are now switching to being military industrial complex contractors, many of them received funding from NQTEL, from the CIA's venture capital firm. And so we call them private, but in reality, they wouldn't exist without the government. But still, the point is that you can't FOIA Tesla, you can't FOIA Oracle, you can't put in an open records request to OpenAI and these other allegedly private companies. So the more they outsource the military and the intelligence to these companies, then the less access that people will have to that information, whatever it may be. Not to say we would get all the truth if we put in an open records request, but still the little bit of truth that we are able to get every now and then will become even more difficult whenever all of these big tech AI so-called private firms become the new military industrial complex.
I was watching an interview yesterday, and it was with an Israeli contractor who, and this is, I think, also one of the reasons why we keep hearing over and over, Israel's our greatest ally. Israel's our, it's like, how exactly? I don't understand. When have they ever provided us a single troop for anything? When have they're not our largest trading partner. I mean, they really haven't been what you would consider the greatest ally for any reason, except that they are on the cutting edge of AI warfare. And that is something I learned in an interview I was watching. I don't remember what it was, but they're on the cutting edge, and they've done things with AI in regards to warfare that American firms have not been able to do. And so I think part of that, the greatest ally, is that we get them to contract with us for certain military, certain aspects. They won't give us, they haven't been giving us technology. They never do. They keep it for themselves, but they'll let their firms, kind of like the Chinese. They're actually out. Yeah, they're very, very similar to the Chinese in that way, highly protective. They won't give it to us at all. They'll just say, no, we're not giving it to you, but we'll contract it and we'll run it. We'll be the ones in charge of it. And that's people scream about China doing that, but they don't know the Israelis have been doing that this whole time too. And why aren't we screaming about that, especially since we're the ones giving them all this money to develop all of this, and then we don't even get it, like the Iron Dome technology.
Absolutely. I'll just add to the Israeli point real quick that many of these firms and many of the people behind them, including Elon Musk, are completely dedicated to the Zionist cause. They've went and kissed the wall. They've sat with Netanyahu and pledged their allegiance to the state of Israel. But also, as you mentioned, the Israeli intelligence network themselves. There have been more tech companies in the world started by graduates of the IDF, Unit 8200, Unit 81. And the Talpiot program than any other country in the world. In fact, when it comes to the spyware companies, for example, NSO, which was exposed in the last couple of years, is an Israeli firm. The majority of those spyware companies, which are infiltrating WhatsApp and all the allegedly encrypted messaging platforms, come from Israel. And if anybody, I know we've talked about it before, but Kim, if anybody wants to know more, you can check out chapter 13 or 14 of the Pyramid of Power, where we go deep into the intelligence networks. And the other aspect I think we can't forget is the old Jeffrey Epstein, blackmail angle when it comes to Israel. When they have these massive firms and massive technology that, as you said, they won't give to the US or any other country, so they can actually maybe have full use of it and examine the code and really know the full extent of how these technologies work. They likely have used them on many politicians, not just in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, but in many, many other cases, and have lots of information which allows them to stay in control. Like your point about what kind of great partner has Israel been to the US? Well, if it's an uneven relationship, it's largely likely due to the fact that Israel has blackmail on American politicians, as well as politicians around the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rationale would be, well, they've got all this great tech they've developed, and we want to be able to have access to it. So we have to remain friends and friendly and do what they want so we can have access to it, rather than them using it against us and giving it to our enemies. But they use it against us anyway. They still use it against us in order to make sure that we remain friends, to solidify that. And then they still give a lot of their tech or contract their tech out to the Chinese, which has been a big point of contention with the Americans. They're saying, oh my God, you guys still have been doing these partnerships with our enemies. How dare you? And it's like, yeah, because they're in the business of making money and making sure everybody stays on their side. They see a rising power. They want to make sure that rising power stays on their side too. They're very smart. You got to give it. The Israelis are very, very smart. And, they are cutting edge. They do come up with amazing technology. They have better technology than a lot of areas of the world, if not everybody. And, you got to give it to them on that. But I mean, they're using it. They use it. They use it for the benefit of Israel. They are Israel first. And okay, great. They should be, right? I mean, that's the whole, you should be, you should be for your own nation. But we should be very aware, I think. And that's the point of all of this in this conversation is, we've got all of these big tech guys standing next to Trump at his inauguration. They're going into the White House, signing executive orders, saying, all right, we're making progress. The people are getting something from it, right? Like Elon gets to expose the waste, fraud, and abuse from various different organizations that the U.S. is funding. And you've got, some other guys like, you've just got, they're all in there and they give a little crumb to the people. So the people cheer and the people then think this is a good guy. This guy's on our side. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but money in business is a whole different thing. And they're willing to do business. They're willing to make money, and they see tech warfare, tech surveillance. Maybe somebody justifies it in their mind and says, well, but it's either we do it or the Chinese do it. So I guess we'll do it. And then they just go forward with these things that are ultimately bad for the people. It's just like we see, I mean, we hear these excuses all the time, which is like, look, if I didn't do the bad thing, somebody else would do the bad thing. So I might as well do the bad thing. And I think that's the excuse they make in their mind when it comes to developing all of this surveillance stuff. And then they also just think, oh, it's not going to be used against the American people. It'll be used against all our enemies. All right.
Exactly.
Like that's ever really worked out. So
exactly, Kim. Great points there. And yeah, I mean, I guess my final thought would just be that I encourage anybody who is making mental gymnastics to try to make this stuff make sense to not be a member of a cult, and I mean that as nicely as possible, to step back and to be willing to question whether Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, Robert Kennedy Jr., myself, Kim, anybody, just being willing to step back and look at the information objectively and to look at these relationships, look at these connections, and not just continue to trust the plan or hope that everything's going to turn out the best. Like, I think we should really judge these people based on obviously their actions, but who they are associating with, who they're working with, and not just their tweets or the memes that they post.
Yeah, I think you guys do great work. I think you do great work. Whitney Webb has also been doing great work, and she's been taking a lot of flack for criticizing the Trump administration. And, people that are just kind of, they, like you said, don't pick a team, just be critical of everybody all the time. Anybody and everybody, we should always remain critical. And I think that great work that you guys are doing is so important because we have to stay critical because everybody will disappoint us. I mean, that's one thing I've learned with all politicians. I've championed a couple of them only to become very disappointed by them. So now I'm just don't champion any of them because they're all gonna just and there's things bet. Yeah, we could champion aspects and certain actions, but then we need to be able to criticize the other actions and keep them and hold them accountable. That's the job of journalists, and you're certainly doing it. Derrick Broze, author, investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, and founder of the Conscious Resistance Network. That link is down below for you guys to check out. That link there will have all access to his books, all of his work. Also, what was the pyramid? That series is
the Pyramid
great.
of Power. Yeah.
Pyramid of Power. That series is great. Everybody should really check that out. Derrick, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kim.